Hello, and welcome back to the ongoing 31 Days of Halloween challenge, where I'm going to be bringing you this kind of sort of little career overview of the amazing Felissa Rose. This is the Morbid Moonlight 31 Days of Felissa Rose, and I am here to chat about a little film called Camp Twilight. I mean, bloody hell, look, it's another summer camp slasher, and you know what that means? Let's get Felissa Rose back in so that all the 80s kids can go, hey look, it's that one from Sleepaway Camp. That's what you might think, isn't it? But there's a twist. This time around, Camp Twilight has the distinction of actually having been co-written by Felissa Rose. She certainly produced her fair share of indie films, which shows that she's somebody keen to get involved in the whole kind of low-budget genre filmmaking world, as opposed to just this cynical turn up and take the money type. But taking a turn at writing as well suggests that maybe one day we'll get to see Felissa Rose actually end up directing a horror film as well. Anyway, I guess that Camp Twilight is sort of your pretty basic summer camp slasher, with a bunch of slightly shitty teens co-opted to this kind of tech-free camping weekend to make up extra credits, without which they're going to fail their classes. Felissa Rose plays this very kind of bubbly, up-for-it teacher, and she kind of plays the part like that try-hard, wanting to fit in with the kids' cool auntie who really doesn't have a clue what she's doing. A bunch of kids go to camp, and after they've goofed around for a bit, bad things start to happen and bodies start turning up. You know the score. This isn't anything new, of course, but what it all comes down to ultimately is, do you like these characters, and is the whodunit element satisfying in that it offers up a decent mystery that makes sense and is a story worth telling? Oh yeah, and because this is a slasher, I guess you can also chuck in, are the kills any good? Well, first off, with the exception of Felissa Rose, the teen cast are pretty much your bog standard, slightly whiny gang, although their personalities are decently well defined so that you always know who's who. The acting's decent enough, some obviously being better than others, but they are quite an inert bunch in terms of the fact that none of them kind of really stand out that much or offer you one particular member of the group who you want to keep your eyes on. They're all pretty much of a muchness. One of the bonuses here for me, though, is yet another Dave Sheridan performance, and I think one of the things that I'm going to come away with from the 31 Days of Felissa Rose is a real love of Dave Sheridan's work. The guy really is hugely underrated and consistently turns out these really kind of quirky, memorable characterizations no matter what the project is. Here he's playing Ranger Bob, and unlike quite a lot of his other parts in films that we've talked about in previous days, he actually gets the chance to do full-on goofy comedy here, as opposed to the kind of deadpan stuff that's more familiar to him, and it's worth saying that he's equally great doing either. It's interesting that from Victor Crowley onwards, with Scream Test, Big Freaking Rat and Camp Twilight, it's almost the case that the kind of Felissa Rose Dave Sheridan film is now almost a thing in itself. This kind of certain type of film that you could almost categorise as its own distinct thing. It's kind of half earnest, likeable characters and half quite entertaining, slightly lame, quirky comedy, with this kind of bright, breezy approach, usually involving familiar faces, and with a few horror cameos. I don't know if it's a conscious thing or not, if it's about a kind of similar group of people working around shared ideas, but all of these films have got a very kind of similar feel to them, and to be honest, even though I don't think any of them are perfect, they're all a lot better than you'd expect them to be. And they've all got this kind of nice lightness of touch that makes you not mind so much when they're a little bit shoddy in places, because you can sense this kind of an enthusiasm and feeling that the people making all these films are having a good time. I don't know how much of a blip it is, or if it's just a complete coincidence that I've watched 3 films starring Felissa Rose and Dave Sheridan that all feel like they've been made by the same director and kind of inhabit a similar sort of filmic world, but I really like the fact that the Felissa Rose movie is actually starting to feel like something in itself and has got a recognisable style that I'm learning to really get on with. Camp Twilight is entertaining, low-budget fun, but again, I think that it suffers from a slightly saggy middle bit, when we just spend time with the teens, who are a pretty vapid and unlikable bunch, to be honest. Both Dave Sheridan and Felissa Rose get a chance to do some different things with their roles, and I actually think that this is one of Felissa's best performances to date, just because she really goes to town with it and actually demonstrates, both in writing and performing, that she understands what she's doing. I'm giving this one a Felissa factor, probably based just on the fact that her screen time could be longer. Probably about a 7 out of 10 on this one. I would say that this is a must-watch for Felissa Rose fans, just for what she does with her role, and of course because she's written it, which is always interesting to see. As for the film itself, well, I think it's fairly satisfying in that it doesn't suffer from the low-budget stigma of the messy, don't really know how to properly end this one conclusion, and if anything, it's the bit of water treading before we get to the finale that really holds this one back for me. I think the end's actually one of the best things about the whole film. However, I think that as a slasher, it's fairly tame, to be honest. It's almost going for this, it's almost going for a PG, you'd think, because it's definitely on the tamer end of the spectrum, which I know for a lot of slasher fans is the same as saying, don't bother watching this, but I think it's worth sticking around for. Is it the best Felissa Rose summer camp slasher film? Sadly not, but weirdly, there are actually quite a lot to choose from. My bet would always be Camp Dread, personally, which this kind of feels quite similar to, but without any of the snap or charm of that film's ensemble cast. It's kind of empty-headed, but totally serviceable, kind of little by-the-numbers slasher. It leans a little bit too heavily on the teen side of things and not enough on the hack and slash. I think probably about a 5.5 for Camp Twilight, just because I think that the finale earns it an extra point for being well thought out and quite intriguing, although obviously that's not something that I can get into that much here. Suffice it to say, if you stick with Camp Twilight to the end, then it will actually surprise you by being more clever than you think it is the first time you look at it. There's also, I should mention, very brief cameos from Camille Keaton and of course Linnea Quigley, which is pretty cool. I admit, I always like to see Linnea Quigley in a film, but to be honest, I definitely wouldn't say watch Camp Twilight because you think that it stars Linnea Quigley. It's just your basic cameo appearance in it. But anyway, that's the end of day number 22, and I hope that you've enjoyed it. Please consider tossing me some kind of generous YouTube type thing to show that you care, and I will see you again tomorrow for day number 23 of the 31 Days of Felissa Rose, and you'd better be there, alright?